Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you're here at Islington United, home of Islington Reads and partner of the Novel Spot Bookshop. Just one piece of housekeeping before we get started. I wanted to let you know the door at the back, leading to the back parking lot, will be locked as of 7:15. So you can get out, you just can't get back in. So if you need to step out for any reason, just make sure there's someone who knows where you are. Whenever we gather in this place, we light this light in the name of our dark-skinned peacemaker, and we honor the land upon which we gather, the traditional territories of the Huron-Wendat, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe. Ontario is covered by 46 treaties and other agreements, including the One Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which are agreements to peaceably share and care for the land and its resources. We are all treaty people, mindful of broken covenants and called to live in right relations. The power of story invites us closer to that way because we learn more about the world and others. Tonight, we're so grateful to come close to the stories and work of C.S. Scott Richardson and to the wisdom of Sarah Petrosky. Welcome.
All right. Welcome everybody. This is so exciting because we've done Islington Reads over Zoom for so many months, 2.5 years, and now this is our first in-person one. So I'm delighted to see so many faces in the audience, and some that I've seen over Zoom and some that I haven't seen since the store closed. So welcome everybody to tonight. We have a very distinguished author in our midst tonight. And he's not a very distinguished author, a gentleman I like to call my friend. So this is Scott, everybody, Scott Richardson. And as you probably all know, he has been long-listed for this year's 2023 Giller Award. So when the book came out in January, I said to him, it's going, we remember the conversation well, I said, it's going on the Giller list, and if it doesn't, I'm going to write them personally.
I owe it
so
all
anyway,
to you, Sarah.
when the
I owe it all to Sarah.
Yeah, there we go. So anyway, Scott is a Toronto author, and he was born in Regina and moved to Toronto around the age of 2.5, and his family moved to sort of the Parkdale, somewhere close to Sunnyside area.
We're not quite sure where in Parkdale. It could have been the less attractive side of Parkdale, but I like to think it was the Sunnyside side.
Sunnyside part of. So Toronto was definitely Scott's home. He obviously was raised in Toronto and went to university in Toronto. Was it University of Toronto?
It was.
At the University of Toronto they graduated, and it was with a degree in art history.
Art history.
Art history. So.
Yeah.
He knows his stuff when we refer to
all
the art in there. Scott, once he graduated, I guess, applied for a job. And this is a kind of an interesting little story. And it was to a small book publisher that only published a couple of books a year. And he was in charge of putting together the catalog for this small publisher.
Jeez. Boy, you've done your research.
I've done my research.
That was a while ago.
It was a while ago, yes. Well, you've been in the book business, 40 plus years, and that doesn't include all the writing years since you moved on to your next chapter. So,
right.
And while he was working for this small book publisher, he, I guess, asked the productions gentleman whether or not he could take a look at how the process works of making a book in its entirety. And that's where Scott fell in love with book design and has been a very, very successful book designer for Penguin Random House. Were you various imprints, or were you just Penguin Random House?
I was every imprint.
Every
at
imprint
one point,
within...
on any given day.
On any given day.
Yeah.
So when he worked his way up and he became vice president and creative director for Penguin Random House. So, and along the way, Scott also received a number of the prestigious awards for book design. And I'm not sure exactly how you pronounce the name of that award.
Alcuin. A-L-C-U-I-N. Alcuin. Award.
Alcunan. Okay, I wasn't quite. I
It's
thought I don't want to
it's-
pronounce it wrong.
It's the
so
only book design award in Canada.
in Canada, and
Yeah.
how many times were you awarded it?
It's embarrassing. It's somewhere around 25.
Somewhere around 25. Well deserved.
Thank
so
you.
When
Thank
you
you.
see the beautiful books that Scott has put together, you'll understand why he has awarded so many. So, and on that note, you probably did book design for over 2,000 books in your
Somewhere
somewhere
yeah.
around there.
Rough guess, about 2,000
Around
books all in.
2,000 all in. So
Nuts. Not all of them good, but you know, I did my best.
you did your best. And then I guess along the way, you know, Scott decided he wanted to try writing a book. And I know the people in the publishing house were like, really? This is going to be interesting. And he came out with his first book, End of the Alphabet. And it won the Commonwealth Prize for fiction for First Book Award.
First book, yeah.
First Book Award. So, and then from there, he proceeded to write The Emperor of Paris, which was also longlisted for the Giller Prize. So, as you can see, we have a very talented gentleman in our midst tonight. And we're here tonight, we're going to be talking about color, all the color of the world, in the world. That is the book that was published in January, and again, as we know, is on the Giller long list. And I guess the short list is announced in early October.
Couple of weeks, a week and a half.
couple of weeks, so.
Not that we're counting.
Not that we're counting, no.
Not that
no.
we're counting. Yeah.
And then Scott is also a family man, and his wife, Rebecca, a wife of 30 years, Rebecca, is also in the audience. And I'm going to be asking you a couple of questions, so just be prepared, okay? And they have 2 children. So one lives in Nova Scotia, Alexander, and he's a tattoo artist. And then their daughter, Hannah, there we go. So
There's more that I can't show you.
yeah, and their daughter Hannah has got a very big involvement into film, and also is an
Archives,
archives by
library work. Yep.
library work by nature. So you can tell there's a love of books, and I'm not sure exactly what Rebecca did, but they met at a book convention. So in the olden days, and I guess it was love at first sight.
Rebecca, my wife, was in sales. She sold books for a living, and I made them. And then, we were set up by yet another book person. And that was 30-odd years ago.
There you go. So perfect. So that's sort of a bit of a little recap on Scott's life
I'll be
to date.
handing out my CV after.
There you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, all the color in the world. How did the idea of the book come? Because I know you finished Emperor of Paris, and there was like a 10-year hiatus between, not a hiatus, but there was a 10-year gap between that book and when all the color in the world came out.
I will explain the 10 years as best I can. Number one, I write really slowly, like painfully slowly. I will rewrite a paragraph 100 times until I get it to where I like it. That's number one. So I'm not exactly the most productive writer in the world. Number two, life gets in the way of writing. I mean, I do not make a living as a writer. I probably never will make a living as a writer. So I had a day job. I was working designing books for other people, 9 to 5, 5 days a week, those kinds of things. I had a young family. We were busy raising kids and building a life for ourselves. So all of that stuff gets in the way of writing. I used to, All the Color in the World is the first novel I've written in the daytime. Most of it in the daytime. I started when I was still writing it. I used to write at night because after the family's gone down and everybody's quiet and all the rest of it, then I would run into the spare room and try to write. So that's where the 10 years comes in. Oh, one more thing. The editing process in traditional book publishing takes forever. So I handed in All the Color in the World about almost 3 years ago now. And it was 2 years of editing, do one round, write, rewrite, do another round. Meanwhile, my editor, actually in this case there was 2 editors, they're busy editing other people's books. So you carve out your little slot of time, but it takes a long, long time. It is well worth the time, I will tell you that. I mean, I don't complain about the editing process at all. I love being edited. I've had one editor for 3 novels now. I had another editor join in on this last one. They are the smartest people on the planet as far as I'm concerned. And if you're ever reading a review and somewhere in the review they say, this book could have used an editor, probably they had an editor, but the author refused to be edited. So yeah, I cannot publish a word without having an editor look at it. And I'm very blessed that my editor is also Michael Crummey's editor, Michael Redhill's editor, the late Wason Choi's editor, you name it. So I'm in very august company, and I'm really, really fortunate to be that way. So that's where the 10 years comes in. That's my excuse. The idea for the novel. Excuse me. I try with each novel that I write to do something different, either in the way the story is told, or the story itself, or the cast of characters, or the setting, or whatever. I don't want to repeat myself. So the first notions I had of what became All the Color in the World was, well, I want to try writing in second person, which some people would say is the kiss of death. But if the Scotiabank Giller people think it's worthy of a long list, then who am I to argue? I wanted to write, one of the things that has always fascinated to me is the way that authors can mix fact and fiction, nonfiction and fiction in the same story, using nonfiction to, in effect, enhance the story or tell the story outright. One of my favorite writers is Julian Barnes. And Julian Barnes wrote a book years ago, one of his early novels called A History of the World in 10.5 Chapters. And it's fiction. It is purely fiction from the word go. But in that 10.5 chapters is a chapter on the real story of how Géricault's The Raft of the Medusa was painted. This is a famous painting from the Romantic period. It's hanging in the Louvre. If you've never been, you gotta go. This thing is huge. It's like 15 feet long by about 10 feet high. It's a massive painting. So anyway, Julian Barnes wrote this chapter, which is the real story of how this painting came to be. But he used the manners and the style of fiction to tell the story. And I completely blown away by this one chapter within this whole book of fiction. And that stuck with me. And then I read another book called Epiragon by Colin McCann. And he wrote a novel about 2 protagonists in war-torn Palestine, Israel, the whole Middle East conflict. And he used nonfiction to help tell the story. He interspersed his fictional chapters with nonfiction. I just thought that is a great way to tell a story, and it just completely absorbed me. So that was the premise. I wanted to use nonfiction to tell a fictional story. And so I developed the protagonist, Henry, turned him into an art history guy, not far from home. And I wanted him to be able to, I wanted his life to be informed by the art around him, one way or the other. And I mean, he goes through his trials and his tribulations, and art helps him along the way. Ultimately, I think, saves him. For those of you who haven't read the book, I'm not going to give it away. But I wanted to use real pieces of art, real conversations about things in the art world and the visual world that would have informed Henry, that would have helped him through his day, that would have excited him or explained the world to him. So that's where All the Color in the World comes from.
Oh, great. Now, going back to Henry, while I was reading it for the 3rd time, I kind of wondered, is this Semi-autobiographical.
No.
Not at all. So you were not given a box of crayons at the age?
No, I wasn't.
Okay.
No. The only thing I will admit to being semi-autobiographical, and it's semi in the purest sense, is the character of Gran is very loosely based on my own grandmother. My own grandmother was not Irish. She was a school teacher, and she did teach me how to play cards. And she did have a couple of weird expressions that she would use all the time, like, there's corn in Egypt. She said that every time we played cards and the right card came up for her, there's corn in Egypt, she'd say. So that's the semi-autobiographical part. Yeah, I studied art history in university. Henry is an art history professor in university. We both grew up in Toronto. I grew up in a different part of Toronto than he did. But that's about as far as it goes.
Okay.
I mean, I think every author, to one extent or another, pulls aspects from their life or their own history to inform the book. I mean, in one sense, it's easier to do because you already know it. You don't have to research it. You don't have to think about it too much. So it's a bit of a fail-safe thing, a default thing. But I don't like going that far. I mean, frankly, my life isn't all that interesting, and I don't think it would make a great novel. But there's parts of it that are kind of fun and kind of different. So.
Here you go. Well, that was one of the questions we were going to ask about Gran and whether or not she was based on someone in your real life. So that is
Bessie Richardson.
Yeah. Bessie Richardson.
Bessie Richardson. Her birth name was Yord. She was born around Stratford, Ontario area. And she went out west to Saskatchewan at a very young age to teach school. She married my grandfather, who was the editor and publisher of the small town newspaper, Strasbourg, Saskatchewan. Population 5 or something like that. It's not much bigger now. Yeah, and anybody who's been to Saskatchewan, South Saskatchewan, knows how flat South Saskatchewan is. But the name of my grandfather's newspaper was the Strasbourg Mountaineer. There isn't the mountain around Strasbourg is just like a slight rise. So yeah, Bessie Richardson. So I owe some of the Gran to Bessie, for sure.
Good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Here we go. Now, how about Jack? He was another interesting character, I thought, because it was Jack who was essentially, again, I don't want to ruin it for everybody who hasn't read it, but Jack plays an integral role in Henry's life in getting him to, I guess, confront his demons or accept the past as the past, and it's no fault of his own. Well,
one of the traps I tend to fall into when I'm writing is I come up with what I think is an interesting protagonist, and maybe the protagonist has a partner or a foil of some kind. And I start out writing and I start out putting together the story and stuff like that. Then I realize maybe there should be some other people in this story. Maybe there should be something to act as a foil to the hero. And I had developed Henry, and he had gone off to war and he'd suffered some stuff in the war. And I needed a way of dramatizing what had happened to Henry and how he was coping with what had happened to him. And I did a little bit of research about PTSD and things like that, and realized that an integral part of surviving PTSD or coping with PTSD, it's not exactly a curable thing, is the use of psychiatry and that kind of thing. So I came up with somebody who could help Henry and a reasonably plausible way of the two of them to get together. And so that's where Jack comes from. The fact that Jack is Italian, but he's from Montreal, I just thought was kind of interesting. That he wouldn't be necessarily from Toronto, but he would be a Canadian of some sort, and why would he end up where he ended up? So that's where Jack comes from. He's not based on anybody. I just had this notion of this sort of cool, so a little rough around the edges, Montreal Italian guy who spoke French and Italian equally well. Yeah, so that's Jack.
Okay, and then
Nobody asks about Jack. He's
I
like
know.
he's like supporting player, but
I know,
mean,
but
he's
when Jack, again, don't want to ruin it for anybody else, but when Jack makes that reappearance, it's just,
Yeah.
I was thrilled when Jack made a reappearance after.
yeah,
his
I was very happy. I
convalescence.
mean, it was more good luck than good management that Jack came along. That I had when I started the novel, Jack didn't exist, and then he sort of, as things progressed, I thought, oh, I've got to do something here. I mean, I can't just have Henry droning on and on and on and on, and we're losing my audience and everything. So
There you go.
yeah,
All right, super. Now, talking about the structure of your book.
yep.
Very sparse writing, where every word counts. Did you struggle to?
Oh, yeah.
like-
Struggle.
well,
Let's talk about struggle.
when I mean struggle, like, did you were there I know you like short, sweet
Yep.
books. You do not want the 900 pages Covenant of Waters.
I
that are
don't think I'm capable of 900 pages.
pages and writing 900 pages.
Oof, I don't know how people do it.
Yeah. So, because your style is unique, unique, and
Thank you.
every single book I've read, I
Thank
love
you.
yours. They're fantastic, just because of the sparseness
Yep.
and how you let the reader almost fill in the gaps with the way you write the book.
Yep.
I mean, you did say it's work. It just doesn't come naturally to
No.
you. No.
No, it doesn't. It does. I mean, I'm glad you bring up the reader. I am a firm believer in involving the reader in the telling of the story, if that makes any sense. I would much rather the reader bring their own interpretation of what's happening on the page to bear. I mean, while I will describe a character, I will do it so bare bones that the reader hopefully will have their own vision of what's going on and what that person looks like or what that circumstance is like. So I've always been a fan of that kind of writing in other people. I love short books. I love reading short books, primarily European short books. Not that there are other kinds, but they tend to be lean. They tend to be economical. They tend to, strangely, foster my own imagination and my own vision of what's going on the page. So I spend an inordinate amount of time paring back and sanding and all those kind, planing it off. And I mean, I will literally finish a chapter or a section or whatever, and then I will go back and I will eliminate every adjective, just literally with as hard a criteria as I can muster, just to see how far back I can go. More often than not, I will do that. There are times when I cut it a little too close to the bone, and my editor, thank God, will say, maybe one or two descriptions here or there wouldn't hurt. But I mean, again, working with an editor, the editor realizes what I'm trying to do. And it's not her book, it's my book. She never tells me what to do. She has never, in 3 novels, she has never once said, change that, do this, do that. She's never done the old blue pencil, we'll get rid of that page. All she's ever done is ask me questions. Are you sure that's what he should do? Are you sure what that character would be like that? Would that character say that? Are you sure? You're absolutely sure? The further she goes to directing me is that she will suggest ordering things around. Like maybe you want to put that chapter before that chapter and then have that chapter. She'll explain why she thinks it might be a good idea. She never says you got to do that. I take every note that she gives me to heart. I try everything she suggests. Some of it I don't think works at the end of the day. Like she'll say, try moving that to that. I'll try it, and I'll go, nope, it's not working for me. She'll say, fine, that's great. Well, at least we tried it. She helps me eliminate things. She knows when I wander off the path. But it's all work. It doesn't fall from the sky. It is, I mean, I don't, writing doesn't come naturally to me. I really have to work at it. I really have to study how other people write. I read a lot. And when I'm reading not necessarily just for entertainment. I do that too. But I'm reading to find out how somebody did something. How did they write that paragraph? How did they structure that sentence? How did they use adjectives or not use adjectives? So I do that a lot. And yeah, and in terms of style, that's, you know, I'm as much interested and concerned in how a story is told as opposed to what the story is. I mean, we all know the basic stories in life. You know, there's the hero's journey, there's tragedy and triumph, there's love and death, and all those kinds of things. So those are all the basic stories. How those stories are told is what turns my crank.
All right, so thank you. So going back to, like, when you submitted the first draft, I guess, to your editor,
Yep.
How many words, do you recall how many words it was when you...
Oh, boy.
And then how many words are in the final copy? Like, I'm just wondering,
I can tell, well, the final, All the Color in the World, is about 24,000 words. I probably submitted closer to 30.
Okay.
And then through the process of at least 2 rounds of editing, probably 3 rounds of editing, we pared it back to about 24,000.
Wow. Incredible.
Yeah.
Well, those 24,000 words.
Yeah, it's not, I
pack a
mean, my
punch.
first one, the end of the alphabet, I think I had a draft at one point that was 100,000 words.
Oh my gosh.
And it was just, it was flabby. It was, gives me the willies just thinking about it. But I did a lot of paring back. I mean, you know, and I realized with End of the Alphabet that, yeah, you can pare back. You can get it right down to the bone, and it's still a pretty compelling story.
It's a beautiful story. If you haven't read it, it is absolutely
Thank you.
fantastic.
Thank you.
So I've had a lot of people sent in some questions, so I'm just going to
Great.
sort of jump
Am I
into...
rambling on? I mean,
no, not at all.
People,
I don't
okay.
think you are. This is fascinating stuff.
In my own head, I sound like I'm just going on and on and on and on. Anyway, okay.
So Lindy, I don't know if Lindy is here tonight, but Lindy submitted a question.
Yep.
So she says, you, as the author, you have a gifted way in reaching characters' inner thoughts through questions. So, for example, on page 134, the quote is, if reversing time was all that was required, how far back would you let it run?
Right.
So, like you said, she says you're reaching the character's inner thoughts through questions.
Yeah.
And then again, how long should you stand in front of a child's grave on page 188? Mm-hmm. How did you decide to use questions instead of making a statement?
You know what? I mean, it's no more interesting than just coming up with a different way of telling that aspect of the story. With the case of, you know, in the case of the standing at the child's grave in Sicily, I needed a way of getting into Henry's head as to what he was feeling. And I could have described what Henry's head was feeling, but then I thought, well, why not, you know, why not have him question himself? And in the case of the other questions in the sequence, it's Jack asking Henry the questions. You know, how long? You know, how far back would you go? You want to reverse what has happened to you. You want to turn back the clock to a point when all of the bad things had not yet happened, and your life could have been far different. Well, how far back do you go? Do you go as far back as enlisting in the army? Do you go even further back? Just all of that kind of. So yeah, it's just a piece of craft to tell the story a slightly different way, rather than narrating or rather than just doing exposition.
And it's a good way of keeping things short and sweet.
Well, exactly. I mean, normal people don't ask paragraph and a half long questions. They ask one sentence.
There you go.
Yeah.
So another question that came is, how did you decide to use Jan Martel's quote, art is seed, art is memory, art is vaccine?
That's a great question.
And when did you first read this? And when you first read it, what was your initial reaction to reading that want you to use it?
I love it when people ask about epigraphs. Very early on in the process I have when I'm writing, when I'm writing a novel, and I have got the basic idea formed in my head, and I'm starting to actually write the book, I look for an epigraph. And an epigraph, to me, is a snapshot of what this book is going to be. Like when you're reading a book and the reader opens that to the epigraph page and they read the epigraph, that epigraph should say to them everything they need to know about what's about to unfold. So I remembered Jan Martel's Beatrice and Virgil because I had designed his book. And this was years earlier. I can't remember when Beatrice and Virgil came out, 2000. It was after Life of Pi. Anyway, and I remembered when I was designing, when I designed books, I used to read them, at least certainly the fiction. And I had read Beatrice and Virgil back when I was designing it, and then I was starting to write All the Color in the World, and I remembered how Jan had talked about art and how art was informing life and whatnot. So I went back to my copy of Beatrice and Virgil, and I literally hunted for it. And there it was. And I said, as soon as I saw it, I went, yep, that's the epigraph right there. Right there. So, yeah. Epigraphs I love reading epigraphs because they're just, it's when the author, I think it's when the author is most creative and most in touch with what he or she is about to write or has written. The epigraphs for me come very early on in the process. Other writers I know, they don't find an epigraph until after they're done. So, yeah.
All right, how about title? Did you, yeah, I know. I think authors always hate this. Was this your title, or was that something that you worked with through your team? All the Color in the World.
I owe All the Color in the World as a title to my wife. I'm writing away, and I've got the thing just about done, and I had a list of things it might be called. I tried one-word titles. I tried all kinds of stuff, and of course, my wife, having been in the publishing business and being the avid reader she is in her own right, I showed her the titles, and I suggested a few, and she would make that face. And so we were kicking around titles back and forth. And we knew the color would be in the title somewhere. All the Color in the World is. All right.
There you go.
Yeah,
wonderful.
Absolutely.
And it's great. And it's beautiful the way you weave color throughout the story
really lucky.
and the importance of color in our world.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
so on that note, it's probably
I'll take a poll. One of the other titles that was on my short list, I don't even think I told you this one. I might have. The Natural System of Color.
Oh.
Boy, dead silence. Phew. Thumbs down. Okay, thank you. Sounds like a science book. Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, yeah.
So how much time were you researching on colors? I know you give Cassia St. Clair her book, the title escapes me.
Secret Life of Color.
The Secret Life of Color. You give her some credit. So did you spend a lot of
time.
And how much, when you were studying art history, did you get into studying color as well with art history?
A little bit. Yeah,
So.
I studied color theory when I was in school, and we all did that to a certain extent. But this is the portion of the program where I plug the internet. I love the internet for this very reason. And in the course of this, I knew there were certain pieces of art and certain aspects of color theory or the history of color or those kinds of things that I'd known since I've gone to school. And there were certain pieces of art that I knew I was going to put into the book. But it wasn't, what I didn't want to fall into was picking all my favorites and just putting them in the book. I wanted the art that was in the book and the stuff all those factual bits to help tell the story. So there's art in there that I went and found that I didn't know anything about or I barely knew about. But when I saw the piece of art, I said, that's part of the story. That needs to be part of the story. So I did a lot of research, most of it online, because it's, if you really want to, yes, you can travel to the Louvre and see the painting hanging on the wall, but you know what? You can go to the Louvre website, and there it is, complete with description, which is great. So I did a lot of that. I was constantly on the internet looking at stuff, and I have lots of textbooks, and I bought a lot of books because I like to read the books. I think I have probably a dozen color theory books of one shape or another that I bought over the course of writing the book. So yeah, tons of research.
Okay, and just as a personal, do you have a favorite color?
Do I have a favorite color?
Do you have a favorite color?
Well, let's see. My watch is orange.
Yep.
The
Your
front
socks
door,
are kind of pink.
The front door of my house is orange. Yeah, I'm going to have to go with orange, of a certain kind of orange, like a Veuve Clicquot orange.
Oh yes, okay.
As opposed to just Halloween orange. I mean, predominantly orange seems to filter up in our household and whatnot.
There you go. It's a happy color.
I think so. I think it's a great color.
Another question that came in was the use of postcards.
Yep.
So you have a postcard at the very beginning of the book.
Yep.
And then you end up with a postcard being slotted in the pages.
Yep.
So is there a particular fond attachment that you have to postcards? Why did you decide? Again, is it because postcards you cannot write a lot on? It has to be short and sweet when you send a postcard.
That's pretty good. I like that. That's a good theory. Okay, I'll go with that one. Yeah.
Just
postcards. I wrote the whole book on postcards. Well, postcards. I mean, it's like having a character ask questions. It's a way of telling a story. Yeah, it could be succinct, but in the case of the postcard at the beginning of the book, the visual postcard, that I owe to the woman who designed this book, Kelly Hill. She has designed all three of my novels. She is great at bringing subtle little visuals into the inside of the book. So she was the one who picked the Sunnyside Amusement Park postcard. She'd done her research. She had read the book. She knew that a good portion of Henry's boyhood is spent at Sunnyside, on the beach, in the pavilion, swimming in the pool, going to the amusement park. So she'd done that. The postcard at the end of the novel is Henry has struck up a correspondence with a Sicilian woman. And this is just part of the correspondence, is that he sends her a postcard. Yeah. So yeah, it's a visual element to a certain extent. It was a nice buttoning up of the beginning and the end. So yeah. But I wrote the thing at the end before Kelly put the Sunnyside postcard in the front. Yeah, it was my idea.
Now, talking about Kelly Hill, like as a book designer yourself, was it hard to give that over to someone else to design your book? I know you were you've done so many.
I hired Kelly Hill back in the day.
Okay.
She worked for me. No, it wasn't hard at all because two reasons. Reason number one, when I started writing seriously, I was still working as a book designer. And I had spent an awful lot of time in rooms meeting with authors who think they knew how to be book designers. And authors, by their very nature, are very close to their books. They have lived with these books for years. So naturally, they will have ideas about how the book should look. However, there are professionals out there who can make a book look really good. So I didn't want to be one of those authors who dictated how the book was going to look, even though I knew how the sausages were made. I know how they do these things. I didn't want to be one of those authors. I also was concentrating on writing. I didn't want to be the designer who also writes. I just wanted to be a writer. That's all I wanted. When it came to these books, I was the writer, not the writer and the designer, not the designer and the writer. So that was number one. Number two, Kelly Hill is arguably the best book designer in the country working today. If you have bought a copy of Anne Marie MacDonald's Fane, that's Kelly Hill. If you've bought Margaret Atwood, that's Kelly Hill. If you've bought Miriam Taves, that's Kelly Hill. So I was in really good hands. Like, I mean, really good hands. So I had no problem handing it off to Kelly, for sure. And she'd done so great on my first two. Why would I change horses at this point? Not that Kelly's a horse, but that was a bad metaphor. Jeez. That was horrible.
We won't tell her.
Okay. In the whittling process, that's coming out.
All right, so another question that was submitted was, does writing a book like this, short and sweet, or like writing books like your other two, does it change your outlook? Like after you finished the book, does it change your outlook on life in any way?
Wow, boy, that is a good question. I've never been asked that. Does it change my outlook? Yeah, it does. I think a little, absolutely. I think, yeah, sure. I mean, writing the books that I've written, including the last one, I've written about things that are not part of my personal experience. In the case of All the Color in the World, I'm writing PSD is involved in the novel, as is the loss of a loved one, premature loss of a loved one. That's not part of my experience at all. So I have learned what that experience might be like through my research and through writing and stuff like that. The Emperor of Paris deals with what was then known as word blindness, what is now known as dyslexia. I don't suffer from that, thank God. But I learned what that's like. And how does that inform a life? The first book, at the end of the alphabet, the protagonist is given 30 days to live. Mm-hmm. I've never had that sort of Damocles hanging over my head, thank God. So yeah, I learn by writing. I think I'm a little bit more sympathetic than I once was. And certainly in the case of All the Color in the World, I discovered new pieces of art. I mean, I love art. I mean, I will read about art all day long. It's one of my passions. But I learned about art I'd never known about, or had barely known about, had seen in passing somewhere. So yeah, it does change me. Yeah, it does. Great question. Wow.
And then you always have your books set in very interesting settings. So you've got Toronto, obviously, and then you're in Italy. You were in France with the Emperor of Paris. Mm-hmm. You were around the world, pretty much.
Yeah.
Have I lost? Whatever. Anyway, I guess something's happened here.
The sound guy's he's waving.
There we go. Anyway, I can project. It's not a problem. I think most people probably could hear me. I don't. Pardon me? Oh, my battery's dead. Oh, well. Well, it's getting close. I just looked at the clock, and it's we're getting close to. So anyway, sorry about that. I'm happy to.
I can repeat the question.
So, are you a big traveler? How did you decide where the settings were going to be set in the various books? Like, obviously, this book, there was a love of Italy that came through.
Yeah. I want to be a big traveler. I want to be desperately. Going back to what I said initially about my writing process and the fact that it takes me forever, and it is a struggle, and I spent 5 years on the first one. It's close to 10 when you add it all up on the last one. So if I'm going to spend that much time, I want to be in a place that I'm interested in, or that I like, or that I've been to. I had started writing All the Color in the World. I knew it was going to be set in Italy somehow, because my family and we had been to Italy a couple of times. And then we went to Sicily and absolutely fell in love. Like, if you like Italy, you'll love Sicily. We stayed on the eastern side of Sicily. We stayed just in the Messina area, north of Taormina, which is part of the book. So I knew when we went to Sicily, I knew that's where the location was. And then things start to fall into place. I mean, I had the basic storyline going, and I knew that Henry would end up in the Second World War. Where would a Canadian be in the Second World War? Sicily.
Yeah.
At that point, I remembered a book I'd read 20 years ago, Farley Mowat's And No Birds Sang, which is nonfiction about Farley's experiences in the Second World War in Sicily. And there it was. There was my research right there. So yeah, it's rare for me to have set part of this book in Toronto. But I thought, well, you know what? I've written about an Englishman. I've written about a Frenchman. I've got a Montreal Italian in this thing. I might as well put a Toronto boy in there somewhere. So that's why the first part is set in Toronto.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have a few more questions that have been submitted, and we can go on, but I know we were going to say we were going to open it up to the floor. I don't know if anybody has any questions. And if they do, just raise their hand, and if not, I am, like I said, very happy to continue on with the questions that I have got, but just did want to open it up to the floor.
One.
Okay, we've got
There
one
you go.
question coming up.
Good evening.
Okay, a microphone is coming to you, so we can all hear.
Here comes the mic.
Is it on? Listening to talk about your writing sort of made me cringe a little bit because there didn't seem to be a lot of pleasure in it for you. But surely there must be some pleasure. But my question more is, were you writing before you decided to try and do something commercially? Were you doing a lot of writing always, all through your life?
I wasn't doing a lot of writing. I'd spent a little time in the advertising business, and I was doing copywriting and stuff like that. But I'd been designing books. This is probably the early 2000s. I had been designing books for quite a while. And I was looking for a different way, as they say, to scratch the book itch. And I'd done a little bit of writing, and I'd done some copywriting and those kinds of things, marketing stuff. And, so I thought, and I'd spent all this time amongst other writers designing their books and reading their books. And, part of me naively thought, well, how hard can this be? I'd read some bad stuff. I'd read some great stuff, but I'd also read stuff that you went, I could do that. I could knock that out, no problem. Nothing was further from the truth. I spent so much time trying to learn how to do it because it's not easy. It wasn't easy for me. I don't think it's easy for any writer, but therein lies the challenge and therein lies the joy. I don't mean to say that all the work that I do and all the pain that I suffer is awful. It's a weird thing. I will spend a week writing a paragraph, but at the end of the week, there will be some point where I will either take out a word, or I will change a word, or I will fix a comma, and it just goes, and you go, yes, 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 and then you move on to the next paragraph. So there are lots of instances during that whole time when it does flow like water, and it does fit, and all the little cosmic tumblers start falling into place, and all the little ideas you had about plot points all kind of start making sense, like postcards or using questions. All that stuff starts to make more sense. It's not like ditch digging. I make it sound like it's ditch digging, but it's not quite like that. It's certainly not as hard as like trying to find a cure for cancer. Let's be realistic about this. I love doing it, and I will continue doing it until I can't. But yeah, it's work. It's work for me. It's a job. Don't let anybody tell you different. I try and be habitual about it. I try and sit down every day. The great thing about writing is it's not necessarily all typing. There's research, there's reading, there's sketching, there's plotting, there's all kinds of stuff that goes on around the physical act of actually typing. But I love doing it. On its darkest day, it's still more fun than anything else I've ever done.
Interesting. All right, so I'm going to quickly, since I'm sure there's other questions, but this was a perfect segue into asking Rebecca, what's it like to live with with an author toiling away over one paragraph a week?
Well, it gives me a lot of free time. But I often have to remind him to get up and walk around and do something other than just sitting at his desk. And then there's other times when I have to say, you better go start writing. So it's a bit of both.
A bit of both.
Yeah.
And then another question for you. What was it, yes, for you, what was it like when you found out that he was on the Giller long list for a second time? Like,
It's actually a very funny story.
Okay.
It's a great story.
Because I knew he would get on the list,
Just like
as
me.
you knew. But he didn't think so. Of course, he never thinks his books are good enough. So on the day of the announcement, which was, I think it started at 9:30. It was in Newfoundland. So I'm watching the live stream, and Scott has a haircut appointment at 10 o'clock on Roncy. So they're doing all the introductions and thanking all the various people before they actually get to the nominated books. And he looks at his, well, he wasn't wearing a watch, but he looks at his tablet and sees it's like 9:45. He's got to get going for his haircut. I said, what do you mean you're not going to stay here until they call your name? So he goes off to his haircut. One other thing I should mention, he doesn't have a phone. He uses my phone. So there's no way to contact him. And I'm sitting there watching the live stream, and they start calling all the nominated books, and thinking, where is he? I didn't realize that they were doing it in alphabetical order. Of course, he's an R, so he was one of the last ones. And my heart's just going. And then finally, all the color in the world. But I have to then wait until he comes home after his haircut to tell him. But no, it was no surprise to me.
No.
He was shocked.
I was stunned. I was completely stunned.
Yeah.
I mean, it's wonderful. It is. It's like it's affirmation. It's all those good things. But I mean, given what I know about the publishing business, and given what I know about how many books are published every year, and how many really good books are published everywhere, I follow what's going on in publishing, and I watched over the course of the past year all these great books being published. And I just am going, there is no way on earth that I am going to be able to compete, or all the color in the world will be able to compete with these really, I mean, A-list, big names, great books, well-reviewed, bestseller lists, blah, 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 blah. So I was convinced that I would not make the long list at all.
He's making the short list, isn't he?
Oh, just don't go there. Just please don't go there. I'm going to be out of the country when the short list is
October
announced.
11th.
Thank you very much.
At 11 o'clock.
No,
At 11
I'm
o'clock.
going to be somewhere else. I mean, it would be lovely. Yeah, absolutely. But I'm thrilled to be on the long list. It means a lot. It is affirmation. It is a feather in the cap. So yeah, if nothing else happens, happy as a clam. Shocked, but happy.
Here we go. Now, I did when I was doing my research,
Uh-oh.
there's a story you wrote, or a blog, or something you wrote about Doris Giller.
Oh my goodness, that
So-
is research. Holy cow.
And I just think everyone here would get a kind of
Absolutely,
get
sure.
an
I'd love to tell
absolute
this story.
kick out of this
This
story,
is-
especially since you've been
Oh,
nominated
boy,
to the
this is-
Giller long list
this is-
twice.
This goes back a long way. When I first started in publishing, I was working in publicity and promotion. I was a promotions assistant. I was doing the catalogs. I was helping out with author tours and arranging book reviews and all those kinds of things. And when I was doing that, at the Montreal Gazette, the book review editor was Doris Giller. So I was required, whenever I was sending out books to be reviewed, I was required to send books to Doris, Miss Giller, at the Montreal Gazette. This is back in the days when the Gazette, like just about every other newspaper in the country, had a big book section, and she reviewed a lot of books. She was a respected reviewer, all those kinds of things. And if the books that I sent to the Montreal Gazette were not being reviewed for whatever reason, I was required to phone Doris Giller to follow up. Gee, Miss Giller, we've sent you this copy of blah, 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 whatever. We're wondering when the review will run. I had to do that a couple of times. And she suffered fools very poorly. She suffered publicity fools even less. And she was nasty on the phone. She was, don't bother me. I have too many books to do. I am too busy a woman, blah, 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 blah. I lived in fear of having to phone Doris Giller. How many years later? 35, 40 years later, here I am on her long list. Yeah, she's spinning somewhere. She's absolutely spinning. But yeah, that's my brush with greatness, I guess, is Doris Giller.
There you go. It's a great story.
Thank you.
Any other questions out in the audience at all? No?
No? Great.
So, well, thank you everyone for coming.
I
This
have
has
one
been-
thing to say. I have to thank you folks, firstly, for coming out. I'm sure there are more important, more interesting things you could be doing right about now. But it is, as an author, sitting in front of a book club talking about books and talking about the craft of writing, there is no better way to spend my time. I love being in a room like this. I love listening to you guys. I love answering your questions. I will do this any day of the week, any time at all. That's number one. Number two, I have to thank Sarah. And I think everybody in the room, if you're not already doing it, you should be doing it, is you should be driving around looking for real estate for a novel spot too. Sarah is a huge champion of Canadian writing, of writing in general. She has been a great friend to me, to Rebecca. I cannot thank her enough for doing this. I sorely miss the little closet that is a novel spot. And I, for one, will not be buying a condo at Humbertown. So thank you very much.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Yes. That's great. Thank you. And then Beth has got a couple of words to say.
So I want to echo Scott's words. Thank you all for coming out tonight. For our inaugural in-person Islington Reads, I can't imagine a better author. I can't imagine a more interesting book and a crowd who was more interested in it. Sitting at the back of the crowd, it looked like you were all feeling the same way I was, just hanging on to every word. So thank you for coming out tonight. There are a few ways that you can extend your visit tonight. You have maybe noticed the art around the sanctuary, and that's done by our very own Nancy Wraithby, who is sitting in the front row. Nancy, do you want to put your hand up? So if you have any questions about the art, anything you want to talk to Nancy about, she would love to talk to you. So please feel free to speak to her. If you're ready for refreshments, there will be refreshments served in the reception room, which is out the door to the right and just across the hall. Please help yourselves to that. And Scott will be signing books. If you have them already, if you don't have them, Sarah will be selling them. So please feel free to go up and say hi to him and get your book signed. I know he would appreciate that. Scott and Sarah, I can't begin to thank you for this evening. This was, all I can say is it was an amazing conversation. I felt like I was sitting in someone's living room listening to two book lovers talk about the book in particular, but also the process of writing books, the process of designing covers, which is not something I've given a lot of thought to. It was absolutely fascinating, and the anecdote about Doris Giller just topped it off, so it was perfect. I wanted to finish with a quote by Henri Matisse, who said, "I am as curious about color as one is about visiting a new country. Color helps to express light, not the physical phenomenon, but the only light that really exists, that in the artist's brain." Scott, thank you for shedding light on this world through your writing. May be blessed into continued creativity, knowing the pictures you paint with your words leave marks in our minds and in all our hearts. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.